I thought I knew everything about my husband until I overheard a shocking conversation between his mother and sister. When Peter finally confessed the secret he'd been hiding about our first child, my world shattered, and I was left questioning everything we had built together. Peter and I had been married for 3 years. We met during a whirlwind summer, and everything just clicked. He was smart, funny, and kind, everything I'd ever wanted. When we found out I was pregnant with our first child a few months later, it felt like fate. Now we were expecting our second baby and our lives seemed pretty perfect. But things haven't been as smooth as they appear. I'm American and Peter's German. At first, the differences between us were exciting. When Peter's job transferred him back to Germany, we moved there with our first child. I thought it would be a fresh start, but it wasn't as easy as I'd hoped. Germany was beautiful, and Peter was thrilled to be back in his home country, but I struggled. I missed my family and friends, and Peter's family, well, they were polite at best. His parents, Ingrid and Klaus, didn't speak much English, but I understood more German than they realized. At first, I didn't mind the language barrier. I thought it would give me time to learn more German and blend in. But then the comments started. Peter's family came over often, especially Ingrid and Peter's sister Clara. They would sit in the living room, chatting away in German. I'd be in the kitchen or tending to our child, pretending not to notice when their conversation shifted toward me. "That dress, it doesn't suit her at all," Ingrid once said, not bothering to lower her voice. "She's gained so much weight with this pregnancy," Clara added with a smirk. I'd look down at my swelling belly, my hands automatically smoothing over the fabric. Yes, I was pregnant, and yes, I'd gained weight, but their words still stung. They acted like I couldn't understand them, and I never let on that I could. I didn't want to cause a scene, and deep down I wanted to see how far they'd go. One afternoon I overheard something that cut even deeper. "She looks tired," Ingrid remarked, pouring tea as Clara nodded. "I wonder how she'll manage 2 children." Clara leaned in, lowering her voice a little. "I'm still not sure about that first baby. He doesn't even look like Peter." I froze, standing just out of sight. I felt my stomach drop. They were talking about our son. Ingrid sighed. "His red hair, it's not from our side of the family." Clara chuckled. "Maybe she didn't tell Peter everything." They both laughed softly, and I stood there, too stunned to move. How could they say that? I wanted to scream at them, tell them they were wrong, but I stayed quiet, my hands trembling. I didn't know what to do. The next visit after our second baby was born was the hardest. I was exhausted trying to manage a newborn and our toddler. Ingrid and Clara arrived, offering smiles and congratulations, but I could tell something was off. They whispered to each other when they thought I wasn't looking, and the tension in the air was thick. As I sat feeding the baby in the other room, I heard them talking in hushed voices. I leaned closer to the door, listening. "She still doesn't know, does she?" Ingrid whispered. Clara laughed softly. "Of course not. Peter never told her the truth about the first baby." My heart skipped a beat. The truth? About our first baby? What were they talking about? I felt my pulse quicken, and a cold wave of fear washed over me. I knew I shouldn't listen, but I couldn't help it. What could they mean? I needed to know more, but their voices faded as they moved to another room. I sat there, frozen, my mind racing. What had Peter not told me? And what was this truth about our first child? I stood up, my legs shaky, and called Peter into the kitchen. He came in, looking confused. I could barely keep my voice steady. "Peter," I whispered, "what is this about our first baby? What haven't you told me?" His face turned pale, his eyes widening in panic. For a moment he didn't say anything. Then he sighed heavily and sat down, burying his face in his hands. "There's something you don't know." Peter looked up at me, guilt written all over his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but hesitated, his eyes darting to the floor. "When you gave birth to our first," he paused, taking a deep breath. "My family, they pressured me to get a paternity test." I stared at him, trying to process what he had just said. "A paternity test?" I repeated slowly, as if saying it out loud would help me understand. "Why? Why would they?" "They thought the timing was too close to when you ended your last relationship," he said, his voice breaking. And the red hair. They said the baby couldn't be mine. I blinked, my head spinning. So you took a test? Behind my back? Peter stood up, his hands shaking. It wasn't because I didn't trust you. I never doubted you, he said quickly. But my family wouldn't let it go. They were convinced something wasn't right. They kept pushing me. I didn't know how to make it stop. And what did the test say, Peter? I asked, my voice rising. What did it say? He swallowed hard, his eyes filled with regret. It said I wasn't the father. The room felt like it was closing in on me. What? I whispered, struggling to breathe. I never cheated on you. How could that? Peter stepped closer, desperate to explain. It didn't make sense to me either. I know the baby is mine in every way that matters. But the test, it came back negative. My family didn't believe me when I told them it was positive. I had to confess. I pulled away from him, my whole body shaking. And you've believed it too? For years? And you didn't tell me? It has to be wrong, I cried, feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. We have to get another test. We have to. Peter's face crumpled as he reached for my hands, but I pulled them back. How come you don't see it? He said, looking deep into my eyes. The timing, we started dating so soon after you broke up with your ex. You must have fallen pregnant without even realizing it. The test didn't change how I felt about you or our son. I didn't care if he was mine. I wanted to be with you, so I accepted him readily. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. You should have trusted me, I said, my voice trembling. I never even suspected that he wasn't yours. Why would I? We've been raising him together. You've been his father. We could have handled this together, Peter, but instead you lied to me. You kept this secret while I was living in the dark. I know, Peter whispered, his eyes filled with regret. I was scared. But I wanted a family with you more than anything. My parents wouldn't let it go, but I didn't want you to think I doubted you. I never doubted you. I took a step back, feeling like I couldn't breathe. I need some air. Peter reached out, but I turned away, walking out of the kitchen and into the cool night. The air hit my face, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside me. How could he have done this? I thought about our son, how Peter had held him when he was born, how he'd loved him. None of that made sense with what he just told me. I felt betrayed, lost. For a few minutes I stood there, staring at the stars, trying to piece it all together. As much as I wanted to scream, to cry, I also knew Peter wasn't a bad person. He was scared. His family had pushed him into this, and he'd made a terrible mistake by hiding it from me. But he'd still stayed by my side, by our son's side, all these years. He had lied, but not out of cruelty. I wiped the tears from my eyes and took a deep breath. I had to go back inside. We couldn't leave things like this. Not with our family on the line. When I walked back into the kitchen, Peter was sitting at the table, his face buried in his hands again. He looked up when he heard me, his eyes red and swollen. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I took a deep breath and nodded. It would take time for me to fully heal from this, but I knew we couldn't throw away everything we'd built. We had a family, and despite all of this, I still loved him. We'll figure it out, I whispered. Together.